Blast off. All right. Today we're going to be joined by Mr. Brady Riggs, aka Redcoat. Should we call you
That's
Redcoat?
right.
Yeah.
Well, it was.
It's not white. It's not white.
It's now white. The
Okay.
mustache has a little red, but everything else is white. It's a privilege after all these years, to change
It's
colors.
yeah. It's actually it is a privilege. It's a blessing actually to get to
No question.
a certain point in your life. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How'd you start in golf? How'd you get to where you are now?
Gotcha. It's a classic story of failing your way into a profession, like many teachers. I started at 11 with my dad. I was a baseball player and a pitcher. Played all the sports you can ever think of playing. Still love playing sports, all the different ones. Started playing competitive golf around 12. Went through the whole junior golf thing in Southern California with some really good players like Bob May and Ken Tanagawa and some other guys that I'm sure you've heard of over the years. Went to college, played at San Jose State and then at Northridge, and then was getting worse and worse. And somewhere in my early 20s, I figured I probably wasn't going to make it anymore. The swing had pretty well left me. I went from a guy like John Rahm. It was about that length of swing. You mentioned Dan Pole. That's a
Right.
swing
Right.
that kind of my swing looked like. It was really
Yeah.
short. Left wrist was flat or flexed, at the top. And when I graduated high school, I was about 5'8" and maybe 145 pounds. I was not a big guy.
Hmm.
And then I went to San Jose State and I hurt my wrist and grew like 2.5 inches and put on 30 pounds and then came back and tried to play golf with a
Okay.
completely different body and swing. So I went from kind of like John Rahm to John Daly. That's how long the
Okay.
swing got. It was
Okay.
amazing. And the ball was a little less accurate than John Daly. I mean, it was all over the
Okay.
place. So it just kind of derailed my career. But in the quest of trying to figure out what the heck was going on, I ended up finding guys like Greg McCatton and Ben Doyle and became just, I don't know, passionate about the swing, cutting out stuff out of every magazine I could find, huge libraries full of swing pictures and studying stuff, videos from Golf Digest, Jim Flick, and on and on and on. And so, I just sort of ran out of golf playing wise, but kind of ran headfirst into teaching because it was all I was really qualified to do at that point. I'd been in golf for 10, 12 years, immersed in it, and it seemed like a very natural transition for me. So I started teaching. My first job was at a place called DeBell Golf Course in Burbank, and I taught there and I started teaching and was really busy and super motivated. And the pros that had been there for a long time, they're in their 60s at the time, and I was my early to mid 20s. And I was taking their lessons according to them. So after 6 months or so of that, eventually they forced me out and I got kicked out of my first teaching job. So I was very frustrated with the PGA and with the whole idea. So I kind of was doing things on the sly for a few years before I decided to actually get on with my career. So that's sort of how things began for me as a teacher.
So they unionized and said, "Hey, we got to work this guy."
They did. They did. They got rid of me. And I was an arrogant, 23, 24-year-old kid who thought he knew everything. And, I wasn't gonna play real nicely. So I'm sure I deserved it at some point. But it was, kind of a little harsh way to begin the career, but I kept going and eventually just landed at Woodley Lakes in beautiful Van Nuys, California. And I was there 21 years and been at a few other places now over the last decade or so.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned that you had these, you would clip articles and stuff like that. Well, I actually had a binder. So I started a binder, and back then Nick Faldo was hot, so I'd get all these,
Absolutely.
and I had Golf Monthly, Golf the three British rags, and then Golf Digest, Golf Magazine, and then Golf Tips. And
Yes.
actually, Golf Tips had a lot of good stuff. Like Mike Adams was writing about the
Right.
laws of golf, or
Right.
uh,
TJ was doing stuff for that too.
TJ Tomasi and Mike
Yes.
Adams wrote that book, and it was Leverage Arc Width.
Yes.
And then I was just talking to Chris Walke about he's
Mhm.
got this Helix thing, and they said, "Well, we break it down to wide and narrow." I said, "That sounds kind of familiar." but I couldn't remember the LA what laws meant anyway. And and
Yes.
and and those golf tip stuff had a lot of stuff from you,
That's
so
right.
you would have a
That's right.
lot of
My
good,
first one I wrote 90, I did it on Impact. I was teaching a guy named Mike Schwaski, who's still a really good friend of mine and a great guy and a really good editor. And I didn't know he worked for the magazine at all. And he came out and he just wanted a golf lesson because he wasn't hitting it good. And somehow I helped him at that point, which is a miracle considering what I was trying to teach, I think,
Mhm.
1996. But I helped him out. And then he said, "Hey, do you want to write an article?" Yeah, sure. That sounds like fun. And I started writing for golf tips in 96. And, I've been writing ever since. So it's been it was another accident that sort of happened. I was very lucky.
Well, some things fall into place, and
No question.
sometimes you don't really realize your potential, what you can like. If you're coming out, you're a little confused, you're not sure, you're not this, and then you don't know until you try it, right?
For sure. No
Right?
idea.
I mean, yeah, and that's kind of the way things work out sometimes.
I remember first lesson I had in 96 was a guy named Hal Holtquist from Michigan. He was probably like 6'4", 6'5", maybe 330. Big guy.
Wow.
One of the steepest swings you've ever seen in your entire life. I mean, it was almost straight up and down, coming down.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy could take a divot with a 5-iron that would spin your head. And, I was a golf machine guy at the time, so
Mm,
I was trying to get him to lean the shaft more, which was
mm,
not going to help Hal at that point,
right.
but I was convinced that was a good idea.
Mm.
So I owe Hal an apology. If I ever could find him, I would definitely tell him I'm sorry. That was the wrong thing to do.
The more I talk to pros, and this goes back, we had this back 15 years ago. And the more sometimes guys look back on the beginning and they say, I wonder how many guys, I wish I could refund this guy's money. Like
No
he's like
question
years
about it.
ago.
That was at the time I did the best I could. I was that's all I could do. But boy, it was in retrospect, it was a little harmful.
Okay. So today, how would you describe your teaching technique or your style? What would you say it is?
Wow. I try to take what the person is bringing to the table into consideration as the most important factor. I teach a lot of full swing, short game, and putting, so I'm not sort of in one box. I think for a long time in my career, I was doing full swing almost exclusively because of the facility that I was teaching at. But now I'm doing everything. Yeah, I love different ways to practice. I'm a big believer on helping people on the golf course. I used to be all mechanics, full swing stuff all the time, and that's really changed as time has moved on. I've experimented on myself so much over the years with different swing styles and shot shapes, and that I kind of have experience doing all of those different things as a player. So I think that's kind of helpful in some ways too. But I'm just trying to help people as best I can in the moment. I teach such a wide range of players that it isn't boring, but I also don't think I could teach everybody the same way. Like I had I was teaching yesterday, and I had a guy who was 72 who could barely hit a 9-iron, maybe 75, 80 yards. That's not a normal student for me. But he had no backswing whatsoever. So I'm trying to get his hands way up in the air and get some speed, some momentum. That was great. He hit it much better. He was thrilled, because he was just seeing the ball get in the air, which was huge for him. And then I'm working with two of my juniors that are both going to college golf in the next 2 years. They've already committed, and everything in between. So I think I would not be a good teacher if I was teaching everybody the same thing at this point. I'm a kinesiology guy back in college, so I love studying the science of the swing. I'm a big fan of that. I just try and take everything that I've learned and do my best not to screw somebody up as much as possible and get them better. I wish I could define it a different way, but that's really what I'm trying
No,
to do
I
every
mean,
day.
I kind of agree with you in that, you know, golf is a case, in my opinion, golf is a case study of one, and it's
Very
that
true.
person in front of you, right? So
Yeah, 100%.
guys have methodologies and this and that. And the ability to spot what the problem is and try to pull out your bag of tricks and make it happen, right? Help them out.
That's what it is every day, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So it's not like I don't think there's any one solution to any one problem. and sometimes it's not even, it's maybe, and this is from somebody who's taken a lot of lessons from a
Hmm.
lot of top whatever. It just sometimes as some guy says it in a certain way, right? And he snaps his finger. He said, "But that's what no, no, but he didn't do this." So no, no, now I
Right.
understand it, right? So it's
Right. No, and it's funny because I don't know how many times I've worked with players from all different levels, and I'll say something I've said many times just a little differently. And then of course it'll work a little bit. And they'll say, why didn't you just tell me that in the beginning? I'm like, I did. I told you
just
that
finally
way.
sing, finally,
Right. I just told them in a way that they could kind of deal with it. I remember Ben used to say that the chick pecks on the egg 1,000 times to get out,
right,
and that's sort of what you're trying to do with people is help them find a way out of their problem, you know. But I think, going back, looking back now, like the question you asked a couple of minutes ago is when I started, I thought everybody needed to do exactly what I thought they needed to do and what I was trying to do, you know?
right,
So that's sort of how you begin. Like you have maybe some success as a player. So you're trying to teach everybody what you did. That's not very good. And then you start to teach a little bit, and then you find a player that's pretty good that you're helping, and then they're getting better. And then you're trying to make everybody look like that player
right,
because you know how that works, or you've
hmm,
studied Faldo. So you're trying to get
right,
everybody to look like Faldo or whatever that is, and so that maybe can be a little helpful, but again, you're leaving a lot of people out. And then as time moves on, you realize that in the beginning you thought you knew everything and you really didn't know anything. And then as time marches on, you realize you don't know very much at all, but you know a lot more than you used to. And instead of trying to teach everybody one way, you've got a million different ways. And I think that's when you start to actually maybe help some people a little bit more because you're just more open minded.
yeah. It's very dynamic in a sense in that as technology evolves, so does you know teaching. I mean, it's kind of like keeping up with the times and getting your continuing education and learning a little more that you can. It's not easy. It's not easy being you because you have to be part psychiatrist, another part, coach, another part mentor. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And people walk and take lessons for a whole myriad of reasons.
you're right, for
I'm
sure.
telling you, I'm saying this because I was a general manager of the busiest range in America. So you had women that were just lonely and they wanted to talk to somebody and pay for a lesson. I've seen that happen. So
That's
it's like,
crazy.
yeah. So yeah, so I said these guys don't have it easy.
How many teachers did you have back then working at
Eight,
that? 8.
eight, because it was the busiest range. It was actually the second largest concession in New York, city concession.
Wow.
The largest concession was Yankee Stadium. Just to give you an
Wow.
idea. I
It's
mean,
incredible.
I would have February 20, you know, 16 degrees, right? And I'd open at 7. I'd be there like, I got there late. They're calling me. They're calling every, hey, where's this guy? They'd be out there doing Tai Chi and warming up and jumping jacks. In order for me to get the ball machine started, I had to light sterno under there. Okay. I had two sternos going. And by the time they would, the ice would melt off, they'd be out there hitting. And they'd
Incredible.
have an overhead heater. Now can you imagine what it's like to miss hit a golf ball
No,
at 16 Fahrenheit that's frozen like a rock. There's nothing around you. You got one but
no. I'm from LA. We don't have that problem here.
yeah,
I couldn't do it. I'm too soft for
you
that. That
you
would not
you
work.
you couldn't fathom that, but there's people
I
that
couldn't.
it's just like, yeah, oh, that's cool.
That's crazy.
So where are you today now, Bree?
I'm in LA. I'm teaching at 3 places right now. Brentwood Country Club in LA, PGA West, where Walkie is down in La Quinta, and then at a public facility in San Fernando Valley called Hanson Dam that I love. I love public golf courses. So those are my 3 spots right now. And then I definitely do some traveling. I'll be out in Florida to work with my buddy Tony Ruggiero. I don't know if you know Tony real well. He's a great guy.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, so I do camps with him. super guy. Then I'm up in San Francisco a little bit teaching, and then I'm in Hawaii where I was director of instruction at Hawaii on the Big Island for a couple of years. I'm going back out there. I go there like once a year too. So I definitely bounce around and teach in different places, but mostly LA.
Okay. Yeah, I have an office down in Redondo Beach. I don't get out
There you go.
there as much, but I used to go out there every year and just for the big dinner they had at the JW what is behind the Staples Center, JW Marriott and the Ritz Carlton there. So it was a
I don't know
big
what it's called. Changes its
yeah,
name every other week.
yeah.
Now it's crypto. Now it's the crypto.com arena
Crypto, wow.
instead of Staples. We all call it Staples
Yeah.
still, but it's crypto now.
You see, that's
Go
the way
figure.
change things
Yes.
change because those types of things like well, now they've commercialized that, but it is
Hmm.
what it is. I mean, I kind of like LA. So if I had my druthers, I will, people. I'm in Dominican Republic right now,
Wow.
so this is yeah. I live in a country club here, and I'll be back in New York probably at the end of this month. But like I wouldn't. Florida doesn't attract me because it's flat, it's hot, and it's muggy. So if I wanted that, I would just stay on the plane for another 45 minutes and be here. So,
Makes sense. A good call.
but LA's got the ocean, but it's got mountains and it's got this. It's a different, different environment, different flow. I
For
think
sure.
I love it.
We've
Yeah,
got it all. And traffic.
traffic. Yeah, the freeway. Actually, one of the projects I'm working on there is the Purple Line.
The purple line.
Yeah, so it starts on there. Where's that? Wilshire goes all the way up to Beverly Hills,
Right.
out to the VA Center. So yeah, I'm just finishing up Purple Line 2 and 3. I have the vice presidents out there in LA. I'm just I'm here doing podcasts.
Well, if you need any advice on Wilshire, I drive down that street almost
Yeah,
probably 3 days a
well,
week.
we're under the ground, and then you
Boy,
have
the construction's been entertaining, let me tell you.
yeah, oh yeah. Try to do something like that going through Beverly Hills.
I can't
You know
imagine.
the amount of lawsuits that are going on
I
there.
can't even imagine.
Then I got all the La Brea. So you're tunneling through there, and you're going through the La Brea tar pits.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I specialize in that tunneling.
That's going to be a good book when you're done with it for sure.
Yeah, actually, I did the Boring Company's tunnel for
Really?
Elon Musk. Yeah, on SpaceX campus. I don't know. I think SpaceX moved, but they had a campus in Los Angeles, and they
Wow.
hired us to show them how to guide the boring machine and all that stuff. Yeah, so
That's crazy.
yeah, well, it's fun. I'd rather play golf though.
I don't blame you.
So, I'm sorry.
No
So you
problem.
say you're a Hogan connoisseur, and you like the
Yeah,
old
I
stuff, the
mean,
classic swings.
I do. I mean, I'm partial to Hogan's swing. If I had my preferred model, we were talking about different swing styles. Like I like an early trigger that's going to the right a little bit as a right-handed player. I like to
Hmm.
see some shift laterally to begin. I like a lot of movement during the swing. I'm not a big fan of things staying very fixed. Doesn't mean I don't teach some people that way, because I
Right.
do. But on the models that I like, I'm partial to seeing the body go right before the club head does. I like the
Hmm.
body to always be ahead of the club head. I like things to be moving. I definitely see that in Tiger swing, especially when he was winning everything and coming out. He had a lot of trigger to the right, which I love.
Hmm.
So I love Hogan's swing as a model for that because I think Hogan was very lively. He was not static and swinging in one place. So his swing speaks to me for sure. So I really dig that swing. So if there's one swing I'd probably look at more than any other swing would be Hogan's.
That's interesting. Yeah. So yeah, when I worked with Greg, and I did work with a lot of. I worked with a lot of top 100 golf pros.
Hmm.
So we had a Golden Bear facility. So in the beginning, it was Nicholas Flick Golf School.
Right.
So a lot of this hands and figure eights and all that, the Jim Flick stuff. Then the company bought Colbert Ballard Golf Schools. So
Boy, that's the difference
you're going from here to there, like
for sure.
complete different animal. So these guys go from Flick certified to Ballard certified, and meanwhile they still have the same book of students, right?
Wow. Wow.
I
Those
was
students
bad.
must have been on a ride.
Yeah, that was tough. I go see Greg for the first time. I fell in love with his swing. Actually, I saw
Who?
Bobby Schaefer's video,
Sure.
and
Sure.
he was crediting Greg and Ben. So I got to go see Greg. So then I met Greg, and he's always talking about greater motion in a smaller space, right? And he wanted as much motion as you could. And a lot of that stuff in the era when I started seeing Greg was frowned upon. So it was all about restriction and this, and he was like he was contrary. He was a contrarian, but I think and what he told me back then has stood the test of time because
Sure
as
has.
I look on social media, and that's what they're teaching.
Yeah.
Step
Right.
left to get some momentum, and then come back through.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't really actually. And I was a pretty decent player back then. I was like a 0-1 handicap. I played a couple of amateur events. I mean, I've never
Mhm.
gotten. See, here's the thing about golf. So I thought I was swinging like David Frost. In my
Okay.
mind, feel
Yeah.
versus real, I thought I was David Frost. So I was like compact bullshit. The club was way up, but but the ball only knows one thing, right?
Right.
And I was hitting it on the center without fail. I couldn't miss a golf shot. So one day somebody starts recording me, and I looked at it, and that was the end.
Yeah.
I've never been that good again.
You're not the only one to tell that story for sure.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine the amount of people that just you get
I
caught in
mean,
all kinds of.
it's funny because you look at like one of the most popular swings in terms of like for teachers, sort of niche teachers, is Robert Rock. You know, like he
Right.
gets a lot of run, and I don't understand that because I mean he didn't really do anything as a player. You know, so I don't know why we fall in love with something for the way it looks. I mean, I'd rather swing like Hale Irwin or somebody who's won a bunch of tournaments, won a bunch of majors. That repeats. It needs to repeat and it needs to do it under pressure. And like you said, the ball doesn't care what it looks
Ball
like.
doesn't care.
It doesn't care. But we both kind of were in around the same time. Like I was seriously involved with mechanics during the late 80s into the 90s as I was sort of developing into a teacher. Man, that was Faldo's world, and it was
Yeah.
Ledbetter base.
Yeah.
It was very, very different than what's being taught now. I mean, you don't see any of that at
You
all.
don't see it at all. At all. You
I mean,
even
some of
let
it
better.
was
I'm sorry.
some of it had merit, I mean, like being able to control face and path is really important, but that's not the priority now. The priority is speed, and then you worry about face and path afterwards. And, that's a completely different philosophy, which is interesting. You look over time, it's so incredible looking back at Hogan because that swing still plays today, you know.
Yeah.
The way that he moved, the athleticism, that is exactly what's being taught today. It's what Greg was teaching in the 80s,
Right.
and then very few people were talking about it. You said it right. Like it was all about restricting hip turn and not straightening the right leg and on and on and on. And
Yeah.
now
Restrict your
we went
knee.
through that. Yeah, that whole
Maintain a knee.
cycle's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
now we're right back where Hogan was.
but to your point, so Bobby Jones was not powder puffing the ball. Bobby
Not at
Jones
all.
was going after it. He was in the ball 300 yards with a hickory shaft and he was a gonna perch a ball, whatever it was, right? And uh, Ben Hogan was not powder puffing the ball. He was hitting it. Okay. Jack Nicklaus was not powder puffing the ball, right? So you had this era that out of the blue, these guys came out with this control golf. So
Right.
as I was telling Walkie, I said, Curtis Strange was known as Brutus at Wake Forest because he was hitting it a mile. All of a sudden, I'm watching this U.S. Open. I think it was at the Country Club,
Hmm.
and it's Strange and Faldo,
Yes.
and they're averaging like 235, 240 off the tee. Then Strange is saying that he'd rather have a 6 iron from the fairway than a 9 iron from the rough.
Right.
And even Faldo says, "Yeah, I was just powder puffing it just to get him played." Like Norman wasn't doing that. VJ Singh wasn't doing that. but there was a very big camp of guys that figured that this is how they were going to win golf tournaments. Then Tiger
Yes.
came around, and the whole paradigm changed again. We went back
You
to
bet.
normal.
Right. You bet. And what's interesting is even the architecture, like the course design was in that era was very effective for a player who could hit straight. I mean, you had to hit fairways if you're going to win a US Open. You
Sure,
couldn't be blowing it all over the place. You weren't playing courses where power was as important as accuracy. The Open always was, you'd have Andy North win out of the blue, for because he was hitting fairways. So it was a completely different world back then. Lee Jansen was winning that tournament, so it definitely shifted with Tiger. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's incredible that 96 to 97 at Augusta were two completely different universes, right? From Faldo to Tiger. But it did sort of flip on a dime at that point, and the swing all of a sudden changed and became more athletic than it's ever been in one
right.
moment with Tiger, hitting the scene and changing the games. What was funny though is like still even in 97, it was still not quite the way it was taught. And now it's definitely taught like it was being displayed when Hogan was winning majors. And I have video of the original Tommy Armour hitting a driver at St. Jumping off the ground is all the rage now. We know we got to use the ground for speed and all that. And you'd think this was brand new, like we just invented this, but we didn't because Tommy Armour over a century ago was doing the same thing through impact. His left foot was being displaced through impact. Gene Sarazen, a swing of his just came online last week. I forget who posted that, but his left foot was moving through impact and jumping away with the driver. I mean, this has been going on forever, but it got lost somewhere when history was being rewritten to a certain degree by teachers like Ledbetter and players like Faldo, where control was everything, and we sort of lost track of what produced speed. We haven't lost it now. We're in the era of it for sure.
But I think the success that Ledbetter had with Faldo and Price and,
Frost.
it, Frost, but he had, I mean, there were a lot of guys that were seeing him on the sneak too, like Tom Watson, Bernard Langer. Everybody was checking in with Faldo, right? I mean, with Ledbetter. So he had a big influence on, I think, a bigger influence than just the swing. I think the approach to the game
Mhm.
with Faldo, winning that British Open by hitting 18 greens or making 18 pars and things like that, it just changed the dynamic, right? I think a
Yeah, and
little
it's
bit.
weird because it's hard to separate the teacher from the player when it comes to that influence, right? I mean, was
Mhm.
that Ledbetter's influence on Faldo, or was it Faldo being Faldo, and then Ledbetter sort of got credit for that? And I think that's part of the fun thing about going back in time is like you don't have any doubt that Jack Nicklaus became Jack Nicklaus because of Jack.
Jack Grout,
We know
Jack
Jack
Grout, yeah,
Grout would hold his hair in the offseason, but that was golf from Jack
right,
Nicklaus. That's who it was. I mean,
right,
you would never
right.
associate Nicklaus with a coach necessarily as being the reason he became who he was. That sort of changed with Faldo. Faldo was reborn or remolded in Ledbetter's image of what he thought he could be. So that's when golf coaches became more important than we probably should be because Faldo was attached to that. So that's the start of the guru was really Dave
Mhm.
Ledbetter. So those of us that make our living teaching, we have a debt of
Got to
gratitude
credit.
for him because he definitely made us seem more important. Whether we should be or not is arguable, but he definitely changed things.
That's a very good point. And and like you said, I mean, it was being athletic, being mechanical and coached. I think not everybody can play. Well, I personally can't play on mechanical thoughts, right?
Mhm.
I have a video up there on the Instagram page, and it's Kel Nagel and Peter Senior. Okay, so I was talking to Bradley Hughes. Brad's a good friend of mine. He's like, no, we didn't have any formal tuition, right? And if you look at Greg Norman, he has that same cricket move when he was dominating as the world number one player and driving it, you know, driving at 300 yards before it was in vogue, and his right foot slid exactly like Scotty Scheffler does today.
Yep.
So those
And
guys,
Billy Casper had the same foot movement. It's been done, and Mark Calcavecchia and some other guys too.
Calcavecchia, exactly. So I mean,
Yeah.
those guys were doing it innately.
Yes,
So
you're
that
right.
was the way that they were getting to pound that. You know, nobody told them to do that. No, nobody could. I could see the Australian guys being cricket players, right? Playing cricket and developing that kind of action.
Right.
But
I think
one of the
that's the
things,
difference now too, is like with the young guys, as a coach, I can take all the experience I have in the game as a teacher and what I know and look at it, as you said, with all the new technology that's available to us. And we know now why speed happens. We have a very good idea where speed comes from. And
right?
we have a long history of players that were were long for some reason based on their size or whatever. It didn't make sense.
Hmm.
Why was Ian Woosnam so long? Those kind of guys. But we have some interesting data points along the way that we didn't have when I was growing up and learning the game. So I think we can get players much better faster now because we have better data and better technology. What what we don't seem to have in terms of teaching as much is creativity, and that's something that's missing. And I think what I'm excited about in new stuff with the game right now is how interesting the short game is and how differently it's being taught than it was when I was growing up. It was very handle forward, feet open, tilt back, hinge it and block it on the way through and take a deep divot and you do that on Kikuya many times too many, and you chunk them, and then it's just that was sort of the way we were taught. And you used a 60 around the green. I'm sure you had an R90 growing up, and we all had them. And now there's a lot of variation in the way you can hit pitch shots, and that's
Right.
really cool that the creativity is coming back a lot into the short game in a way that I don't ever remember it being. I mean, you had guys like Ballesteros and players that were just innately creative, but
Yeah.
now it's actually being taught, which is really exciting. Like with all my developing players, I'm teaching them three basic types of shots. One is a bit of a draw pitch that's shallower, a little more from the inside, great on up slopes, ball above the feet, into the grain Bermuda, really good technique for that. And then you have much more kind of down and left shots, more diggy, cutty shots. And that one can spin a little bit. It actually will work to the right in the air a little bit. That's an important shot to have. Then we teach everybody to go up a little bit and be able to land a ball and stop it with trajectory and not spin. But it's fun to be able to help these younger players really develop their short game in a way that I wasn't taught. I mean, we were just out there messing around trying to figure it out. But now there's a lot of examples of how to do it now, which is really cool. And I think again, we're going to help players get better faster. I'm always trying to get kids and developing players to be creative and hit shots instead of just making swings all the time, because I think that's what's missing watching players play. So it's the most fun thing to teach anyway. When you have a left to right crosswind and a left toe location, and you've got a kid who's a cutter, how's he going to deal with that if the green's firm? He's not. He's going to have to start it way left and hope he gets lucky. I'd rather him turn it against the wind, hit a holding shot so it lands softer and he can get that closer to the hole. But it's part of developing your game, and getting to a high level quicker is to have an ability to be creative and choose the right shot. And I think that's what the players that I was watching growing up, they just did that because that's how they had to play. Everybody knew how to move the ball around and hit different types of shots. And then somewhere along the way, we became completely dominated by video and technology. And then it was about speed, speed, speed. And now we're trying to kind of blend that whole thing together and get players better so they can hit it farther. But we also want them to be creative with all the things that they're trying to do around the greens and on the course. So it's an exciting era, because I think kids have access to great information and some different teaching now than certainly we did. So it's fun being a teacher in 2025 for sure.
That's that's an interesting point you bring up because see, I learned the game on a pitch and putt. So all I had was a 56 degrees. There was no 60s yet. It came along sometime. So if I had a 56 degree, and back then it was balata balls.
Sure.
So,
You and me both.
right. So I started playing. I had hurt my back, and these guys told me they was playing because we had like football teams. We were all weekend warriors, so we were playing baseball, hardball, fast pitch hardball, football, flag football, like aggressive flag football, full court basketball. So that's the kind of stuff I was into. I said, guys, let's go play this golf. And I hurt my back, so we went to play golf. I got this way. First I got frustrated because I couldn't compress the ball, right? I figured out how to do it. And as it went along, since all I had was a 56, right? I could make that thing do a lot of different stuff. So they got mad because I was shooting regularly under par and beating them for 2, 3 bucks. Guy tells me, I'll bet you $100 you couldn't break 100 on a regular golf course. So there was this course nearby, it was Douglaston. I think it's 5,800 yards. It's a par 67. It has 8 par 4s. Okay, so I did the math and I said, well, see, I had never experienced slicing a driver. You understand what I'm saying? So I didn't have any scars from hitting slices. I've never hit a driver. I figured, okay, if I hit a 5 iron, it was like 305, 300. If I can get a 5 iron to the 150, I can get down in 4 or 5. And I added it all up. So there's no way I could lose this bet. That's exactly what I did. Shot
You must have
92.
got the job done.
But with that 56 wedge, innately I just figured out how to do that. I used to make up a lot of balls stop, like land it just with on like 30-yard pitches, just stop. I don't think you could do that with today's balls. I'm not
Hmm,
sure, but
probably
I used
not.
to be able I used to be able to make it dance and do all kinds of that's more the creative part than it
Yes.
is the mechanical part. So had you caught me then and gave me a chipping lesson,
Right.
I think it would have taken me longer.
You know what? You're probably right. And
I
what's
mean,
crazy is if you were hitting the shots you wanted to hit, you had good mechanics.
yeah,
I think that's the way it developed. People were learning how to hit shots. And because they were effective at hitting shots, they had good mechanics. They could get the club face in the path where they wanted, hit the bottom of the arc after the ball. They could do all those things, regardless of what it looked like. They
right,
were able to do what they needed to do to hit the shot. That's what repeatable mechanics are. It doesn't matter what it looks
right,
like. And now we've kind of we go the other way. Now we teach people how to have good mechanics before they can hit a shot because we're trying to make it get there faster. But in a lot of ways, you lose some of the individuality that comes with doing it on your own because somebody's teaching you kind of a pattern to do, which is fine. But greatness is always unique. It's always unique. There's always a different way or some wrinkle that's going on with somebody that's special. And so I'm trying to, as a coach of young players, I'm always trying to make sure I don't teach that potential out of them.
yeah,
If they come a little weird, and they're good, I'm going to work with the weird, because they're able to make that work. I would rather not lose who they are ever. I want them to always just not think as
yeah,
much because they know how to do it than to teach them a way that may look better, but it might not be something that's innate to them and they probably won't be as good. I mean, Scotty Scheffler has been swinging like that for a long time. It's a very unique swing and
yeah,
it's for him. Like you said, there's pieces you can definitely see in other players, but
sure.
nobody would want to make somebody swing like Scotty Scheffler at this point, right? Probably not. I mean, that wouldn't make sense. But we could steal pieces. But he's great because of the fact that he is a little bit unique and he owns it.
And I think we're seeing more and more of that. Coaches accepting the individuality of the players. I saw this kid, Division 1 player, and he was like in the quarterfinals of the U.S. Amateur,
Mhm.
and he had a bunch of idiosyncrasies, but he was crushing it. He was hitting it on center and getting it through it. And they were showing him on the USGA actually put a video out on him. And I'm thinking if this guy's good enough to make it this far, play Division 1 golf, there's something special about him.
Yeah, it's true for sure.
Right.
I was coaching one of my favorite players I had was a kid named Ben Fox. He was a great player in Southern California. played on the Asian tour for 6 or 7 years. One year he Mondayed into 4 PGA Tour events. That's hard to do.
Really?
He's a really good player. And so I was caddying for him at US Pub Links one year. And a long story, but we're in our first match, a match play. We draw this kid from Idaho. I don't know, I've never heard of this kid. So my kid, he was one of those kids, he'd hit 16 greens with his eyes closed. So he'd hit it right down the middle. And this kid from Idaho got up there and he had this funky move and he had these weird ticks and he was walking in and out and being strange and hits this 40-yard hook on the first hole into the fairway. And we're walking off the first tee and I'm like, hey, you know what? You play your game today. We're going to beat this guy. You got him. We got beat 5-4. We
Wow.
got boat raced. Was amazing, hitting these curves all over the place and had all these weird idiosyncrasies. It was just like it was like a out of body experience watching this guy. We got done, and I'm like, I told him, I go, hey Ben, you're never that guy. This was just a fluke. You're never gonna hear his name again. You've got a career ahead of you. Blah blah blah. Well, it's probably about 7 or 8 years later. I got a text from him after the PGA Championship, and he said, "Yeah, you're right. That Keegan Bradley's never going to be anything. Nice call, Brady." Uh, So I learned my lesson.
Well, you're from my era approximately, right? So you must have heard of Danny Green.
Danny Green, where was he from?
He was from out west. He won the Western Amateur.
He was a
He was
West.
like one of the he's like one he was like one of the dominant mid-ams. This guy had the weirdest
Yeah,
looking
yeah, I know who he
actually.
is.
Yeah, he was like ranked. He was in the top 5 world at the golf week rankings. He was
Right.
like in the
Sure.
top 5 for like 10, 15, 20. He's still,
Wow.
playing well. Like he was like right below Tiger. And I'm like,
Wow.
how's this guy, I mean, look, Eamon Darcy looks like Bobby Jones in front of this guy.
Sometimes it just works.
It just works. And at the end of the day, it's the results that matter. And too bad I'm learning that lesson now, but it's good to know. And I'm still
Yeah, I
enjoying the
wish I
game.
would have
Who
learned
cares?
that before.
I'm still enjoying the game.
I'm glad that you are. So am I. I mean, it's crazy because I'm 46 years in now to golf,
Hmm.
and I still love playing. I still love practicing. I still love learning. I'm I just I've been bitten by it. I was bitten by it in 1980, probably 79, 80, and it's been who I am for a very, very long time. I'm very lucky, that I'm sure you feel the same way that we get to
Yeah, you're
hang out
blessed.
and
Yeah,
grow old in
sure.
the game.
Good.
It's
And,
really
it's a
cool.
game. It's a game for a lifetime. So
For sure.
and
For
if you
sure.
take care of yourself, you. So yeah, I was telling Walkie is I'm at the point now where I'm just like an experimenter. I talked to so many different golf coaches and stuff, and everything sounds so good, and I try it, and I'll go down a rabbit hole and lose myself somewhere, and it'll take me forever to get back to square one and start, and then get caught on the next tag. Yeah, but I enjoy it. I don't care. I mean, it's what it is.
I keep learning. It was funny. I was watching Gary Player had a clip on from the Champions thing they had on last week, and he was talking about how he finally understood what Mr. Hogan was telling him about the takeaway. It took him all these years to figure out exactly what he was saying. So, Gary Player's he's still figuring it out, you know. So
Yeah, yeah,
Trevino, they're great. They're still out there. They love tinkering. They love the game. I hope I'm still
absolutely.
doing that at 89. I hope I'm still doing something at 89. That's for sure.
Right. That would be a good thing. See, that's another one of those things. Why do I keep these pods? They seem to go. I'm not smart enough to know how to use them. So every time I touch them, it turns on some. There it is again.
Yeah.
That's actually Jim Flick. That's actually Jim Flick talking there.
It's
All
funny you
right, Brady.
mentioned
Well,
Jim.
good.
I was going to
Go
say, you mentioned Jim Flick. As a golf machine guy, quick story. I was deep into the machine, deep into the book at the time, working with Ben. And so I was wrong, but I didn't think Jim Flick knew anything, you know, because he was teaching, Jim Flip, we used to call him, all that stuff. So we had a teaching summit in Southern California, and he, it was at TaylorMade where he was for a
Mhm.
long time. And he was there, and a few teachers got up to help this guy who was hitting these big slices, and different teachers had a crack at him to try and help him. 3 or 4 guys went up there, couldn't do much with him, and Jim had him hitting the ball good in maybe 45 seconds, a minute tops. It was incredible. And then I had to start to question my direction, because I was wrong. I made an assumption about somebody, and it was a good learning experience for me. And what was crazy was he could not have been a nicer person.
Yeah, it's a gentleman.
Incredibly nice guy. Like, he came up, he actually said, "Hey Brady, nice to meet you." I'm like, "How the heck does Jim Flick know my name?" This is
There
this
you
is
go.
bizarre. But he was just a really great guy, and boy, changed my opinion in a heartbeat because he could teach.
I felt the same way about that. Looking back on it,
Interesting.
I because he had this figure eight move and he had
Sure.
a lot of hand. At the end of the day, that's just a preference, right? He helped a lot of people.
He
He's
did.
helped
He did.
over the years. I went down to used to go down to Cocoa Beach, I think it was in Florida, hang out with Bob Tosky. And he would sit there all day. He cursed like a sailor, but he would hit these beautiful. Everything was like these the same flick move with a
Right.
draw, like these nice, beautiful high draws with a forward, and it was incredible to watch it. When you watch it in action, it looks pretty good, actually.
Yeah, those guys knew something
They knew something.
for sure.
So, you have anything else you'd like to add, Bray?
No, man, I really appreciate you having me on. I love your page. I love all the old swings, and you know, um, I appreciate you posting those. And I'm definitely it's one of my missions at some point this year. I'm going to start putting up kind of like my top 10 of each player, either on Instagram or somewhere where people can have access to them, because I want to make sure I'm sharing everything that I've got. Um, but yeah, I think you're doing a good service for people that they can see,
Thank
Greg
you.
McCadden talk about the golf swing. That's priceless, and it's fun because some of the things that are up there, I might not agree with, but it's always fun to see the different perspectives, and I think it's
Sure.
great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not yeah, it's just getting it out there and, getting people exposure, and I enjoy it, and I'm glad you enjoy it, and there's a lot of people that enjoy it, and, you could always switch the channel, right?
You
It's
can
an
always switch the
option.
channel.
All right.
Just you can swipe up and you're good to go.
Exactly. That's it. So, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you giving me your time.
My pleasure.
There's Flick again coming on.
My pleasure.
So I really appreciate I don't know what I'm pressing on this AirPod, but it seems to click something over anyway. I appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you giving me your time, and I'm really honored that you would, join me for today and shoot
It's
the
my
breeze.
pleasure, Ralph. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure for me.
You got it, buddy.
Bye-bye.